We started a little over a year ago with the first one at Michigan State University. We held our second one in March at Grand Valley State University, and this is our third one. So welcome. Thanks to Central Michigan University and Marian for hosting us. And I guess, Marian, you want to say a few words?
Hi, everybody. For those of you who haven't met me or just briefly met me this morning, I'm Marian Matyn. I'm the archivist at the Clark Historical Library. And I'm one of the people who pushed Ed to start doing this because I couldn't drive to go down to Ann Arbor or Detroit to exchange ideas with people and learn about digital. So thank you, Ed, for doing this. Welcome, everybody, to CMU. I hope you get a chance. Maybe you need to get your 10,000 steps in. There's lots of steps here in the Park Library building. You're welcome to wander all over the 4 floors and get your 10,000 steps in. And I hope that you might have a chance to visit the Clark and see our new photography exhibit. I also want to tell you just real quickly, when I agreed to do this, there were a number of staff members who said, oh yes, we'll help you. They're all on vacation this week. I'm never going to do that again. But I have been very greatly helped by other people, many other people in the library who are here today, who are helping and participating, and particularly a lot of students. So if you have a question or you get lost or whatever, the 2 students out front, Jen and Mark, will be here most of the day to help you. And so please don't hesitate to ask if you have a question and we can help you. Anything else? Okay, just remember it's a very busy day for classes on campus. There will be students going all over the place in your cars, so when you leave, please be careful. Please be aware that it is a very busy class day and the students will be driving like crazy trying to get to and from class or work, okay? Don't want any of you getting hurt, all right?
So we're going to start off the morning with lightning talks. The first one up is it Allie, doing the digitizing workflow. Let's welcome Allie.
Okay, I'm not super familiar with PC. Okay. Okay. Local disk C. Sorry. Oh, sorry. All right, thanks. Workflow. There we go. Alrighty. Good morning. My name is Allie Wilson, and I work in preservation microfilming at the Clark Historical Library. And I'm here today to talk about digitizing workflow. And what is a workflow other than the process by which we finish projects? For us, it's a spreadsheet, and we use it to track every step of our projects so that nothing falls through the cracks. It didn't really used to be such a big deal to keep track of who was doing what because we only ever had 2 students and 2 computers, so it was pretty easy to keep track of, but all of a sudden we've got 5 computers and at least 8 students employed, and everybody's got different work and class schedules, so knowing who's done what on what project has become more tricky, and we use this to keep track. Some of the steps we have to go through deal with the physical film itself. We'll evaluate the density on our densometer, and we will keep track of the ratio, quality, and content of the film. And we want to make sure that we're keeping track of that every step of the way because, you know, if you're not just one person working on a project and you're dealing with film you're unfamiliar with, you might not realize that it's just the film itself that's difficult to process or that it needs certain attention to certain things. So we try to write it down and keep track of it so that whoever works on the film knows what they're dealing with. And this is our lovely scanner, and this is where we need to enter in the density and ratio and all that. Some more of the steps we'll go through. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the concept that not all film is super easy to work with or process. So cropping images, splitting images, framing itself can be its own job depending on the project. So if that needs to be done separately, we will put that into our workflow and make sure that somebody has done that on its own, and then processing would be a separate step that we need to keep track of. Yeah, and then all the quality controls and everything like that. Quality control happens a lot. It's only listed on here twice, but there are at least 5 times that a different student will go through all the film, you know, first after it's been processed, then foldered, then in its PDF form. So we want to make sure that somebody is getting to that and doing that for every step. And then derivative file creation, when we folder everything, and that happens multiple times, and we have to copy it and put it in different drives. And this also helps us when we're creating searchable PDFs, so it's an important step that we want to make sure is done properly and that someone checks. And this is where it all ends up on CMU Online Digital Object Repository, Condor, and that's where the public has access to it. So its quality is pretty important. We want to make sure somebody's checked it, and of course that somebody has put it up. This is where you can contact us, and please feel free to follow us on Twitter at DigMitchNews or to like us on Facebook. Thank you. How to get out of there?
Pause while it now recognizes my disk. Find it. So we'll try this again. Okay, very briefly. And you can see the demo later because I'm going to be flipping through a lot of screenshots on this pretty quickly. We're using a digital asset management system called ResourceSpace, which was actually designed for Oxfam in 2006. And it was originally designed for all kinds of documents, but we were using it to solve a particular problem for us at Ferris. It was the storage of online photos. Since 2000, our university photographer had actually done everything electronically, and we were getting more and more photos, and he was using them in a system called Extensus Portfolio, which is great for photographers, but it's something like up to, I think it's like $1,100 for every license, not a site license, a user license. So we paid for one for the library for a while, but it also didn't allow us a lot of the control we want and an extensive amount of editing of photos, which we didn't need to do. So we set out in the archives to find our own system and came up with this. And it is, as I said, it's called ResourceSpace. This is a snapshot of what it looks like. And it has solved a lot of problems for us, the biggest one being access. And you can see how it is now currently stored on a server that has about 16 terabytes and duplicated in various configurations. It's run on CentOS 6, which is basically Red Hat Linux. According to my automation librarian, I didn't install it. He said this is a very problem-free thing to install, which is a very good thing when you're looking for something to do. As you can see from the screenshot, it lets you do thumbnails of various things across the bottom. It's got a nice little search screen, but it lets you deviate some searches that don't really apply to us. You can see you can do date, you can do subjects, you can also do location, which isn't really as relevant for our purposes. But the big thing for us is the login. We have various types of access. We have user access, you have editor access, you have administrator access. So we can give our students limited access to put in or edit certain things. We can actually give other staff members more access. And so here's how you can see in a collection. In this case, most of our collections are private. It's eligible to the photographer, my coworker, and myself, and they have the editing, the rights to put stuff in and out. But this is another thing that is great. When you're getting stuff from other entities, like when they scan stuff for you, it's going to be one of two things: a weird format basic that is raw to a particular camera, or something like PSD or something like a TIFF, which is huge. What this does is, you can see down here, it's got different things. It's got a PSD, a JPEG, a low-resolution JPEG, a screencast. So when you're sending it out to someone else, you can send it in whatever appropriate format that they need. And it just takes the original file, and the system actually converts it to another one. This is huge when you're trying not to send out huge files to someone who's going to blow it out, because you're not sending out the file, you're sending out, we're going to show you a temporary link that gets them in so they can download it themselves, which for the sharing of photos has been really helpful for us. You can see here, it's got an email button. You can email a whole collection or a folder. You can email it to a person. You can give them temporary access to download it. So therefore, we were in such trouble with IT. We kept blowing up our email accounts because every time you send a file, we'd exceed our limit. This has completely ended that. We're not sending the photos anymore. We're just sending a link that they can use to download themselves. It sends them an email. Sometimes it ends up in their spam filter, but if we warn them where it's coming from, it will do that. And we can give them access for X period of time, say 30 days or whatever they say is necessary to complete their project. Another thing that we've just started playing with, although we haven't quite done the configuration to make it go along with the website, is we can do temporary galleries. We've talked about doing things like Omeka, but this is for now a simple way for us to show. This was an exhibit we had an infamous fire at our institution to show a new donation that we got to the archives that showed the tower coming down that we hadn't had before. So they actually can create a URL, not a pretty URL, but you can redirect it to something easier to remember so that they can look at a particular collection or particular photo that you want to promote. So those are some of the things that the system has done for us, and I'll be demoing it later in the day. And it's worked really well for us because it solves storage problems and transfer problems that we had with our photo collection. We occasionally put a few documents in it as well for researchers, and it does work with that, but that we haven't used it as much for. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Rob Goldey. I'm here with the Bentley Historical Library down in Ann Arbor. I'm going to talk to you about our reel-to-reel digitization project that we've been working on for the last 2 years. So a brief kind of overview of what we've been doing. We've selected about 1,600 reel-to-reel tapes, a whole variety of formats from speeches, musical performances, religious broadcasts, interviews, a whole wide variety of material. And big reason why we want to do this, and big goal we just wanted to increase access to our materials. We don't have a reel-to-reel player in the reading room. We have no way of making this available to our researchers, and for years these have just been sitting in boxes and slowly degrading as magnetic formats tend to do. And we also wanted some quality digital transfers, and also kind of work with the idea of what's it going to be like if we begin to do more and more digitization. So I want to briefly mention some of the really interesting kind of challenges with reel-to-reel specific formats. Is that one of the things you can have as opposed to a cassette tape, but with a reel-to-reel tape, you could actually have a myriad of different recordings, recorded at different speeds, different fidelities. And this presented a really interesting challenge to us when we did start doing our transfers, because when we did our transfers, while it might have said in the finding aid or on the box, speech 1975, we then ended up finding that not only was there a speech from 1975, there was also another speech from a different date, there was an interview somewhere, and there was also someone's home recording of like the Bing Crosby show or something like that, all on the same tape. So when we actually got our digital files back, we ended up finding we had many, many files coming from one tape when we originally expected one piece of content. So a brief look at our workflow. We selected our tapes. We first captured some basic metadata, what was on the box, the date, what we had from our finding aids. And then we sent them out to the vendor. And once we received them back to the vendor, we performed some quality control. And then our next step we're working on is actually going to begin ingesting them to our Deep Blue DSpace repository. And then we're also providing access in the reading room to our researchers. So in detail, we received from the vendor 3 types of audio files. We receive a preservation wave file, which is essentially the straight audio taken right off the tape, no manipulation or anything's been done to it. After that, we take that preservation wave and we do a little bit of normalization to that. Essentially, it cleans up the peaks and the valleys that you'd find from like recording of varying quality, and it kind of makes it a little easier for users to hear it. And then finally, using that production wave, we also just turn it into an access MP3, and this is just kind of meant so that the user can make it available in the reading room, really kind of a standard, not a too big like a gig file. This is more like a couple megabytes that they can use and download quickly into the reading room. We also had embedded metadata into the WAV file in the Bext header, as well as some external metadata with a METS XML file and some images were taken of the boxes themselves, which we found has provided a lot of really great descriptive information because a lot of things are written on there. And when we start getting derivative files, we realize, oh, right here it is scribbled in the corner that says, additional speech 1976 or something like that. And then the vendor prepared a notes file, which just includes their basically information that they found during the transfer. Anything unique, this transfer was at this speed, this was a funny kind of format, this tape was very dirty, whatever, something like that. Something we've been working on to validate and perform quality control on our materials is we've kind of developed our own little validator in a Windows operating system. It basically just batch processes the files. It checks for a couple things. It checks that the files meet our file naming specifications. It checks that the embedded and external metadata exists. It's well formed. It looks like it's supposed to do. It when it cycles through it, it generates exactly we get exactly what we want out of it. And then we also check the checksums, which are preferred by the vendor, and then file format and quality. And here's just a kind of a look at up in the top here is our Bext editor, and then over here is just an example of our XML, some of the information you find in there. Next step we do is we do manual quality control, and this essentially is we open every file. We don't play the entire file, obviously, but we kind of spot check. We look at the waveform, and then we also listen to it to make sure it sounds okay. We also have kind of go through the actual the file naming structure and check it manually, just kind of make sure that everything looks the way it is. The images are named properly, the METs, the audio files. And then we also take the content of the notes file down here, and this is actually then added into our database so that we can come back and look at it later if there's any issues that we need to come back and re-examine. So the next step, the thing we're currently working on, is providing access. So we're going to be taking the content taking the content we've received and uploading it to our Deep Blue repository. But because of the kind of ambiguous copyright here, we've kind of decided just to kind of be on the safe side. We're all just going to keep everything access limited only to the reading room. And the way we're going to do that is while anyone can access the Deep Blue repository, on the web anywhere, anyone who would attempt to access any of these specific collections would then be basically directed with a little message on the website that says, due to copyright restrictions, this material is only available in the reading room. Please, visit the Bentley Historical Library for more information. And so when you get to the reading room, instead, the user will be presented a page much like this, which has, the basic descriptive metadata on top, and then the WAV files, which they can only play, they cannot download or copy or anything like that, as well as the images from the tape. And so we've modified the web browser in our little access stations and in the library to make it available for the user without letting them download or take anything or sneaking a flash drive in or anything like that. And so that's basically it in a nutshell. So thank you.
If this works this time. All right, hi everyone. I'm Kindness Goda, and I run the social media for the Clark Historical Library. I'm here to talk about the sort of meshing of social media and historical documents. It may seem paradoxical to mesh something so modern and so full of history, but I'm going to talk to you today about the reasons I think that it's important and it serves a purpose. For younger generations, social media is arguably the most important form of media, and so meshing new media with old information, I think, is really important to continuing the preservation of history and showing its relevance to younger generations. The platforms that we use here at the Clark are Twitter, which is probably, I would say, our most important outlet. It allows for short form blogging in text form and also the sharing of photos and video. Facebook is something we also use. It's seen as necessary for organizations these days, but it's becoming less relevant because they're increasingly charging more so that your followers can actually see your posts. Pinterest is another platform we use. It's a visual platform where you can share images, videos, or sometimes links. And it's quite useful for something visual like preservation, but not often as salient as something like Twitter. Other platforms that we've considered are Tumblr, which is a multifunctional blogging site, and Instagram, which is a photo sharing site. And we also use a social media manager called Hootsuite to schedule our Twitter posts ahead of time. Our strategies here at the Clark have sort of revolved around consistency, content, and contests. Maintaining a social media presence, it really requires consistency, as in posting regularly and then posting generally the same types of content. We post about 2 times a day, mainly in the afternoon and the morning when Twitter traffic is very heavy. And content plays a role, of course, in who thinks it's valuable to follow us in the first place. Ours kind of revolves around Michigan, history, CMU, preservation, and I would say most of our followers are interested in at least one of those. We try to inform people, but also entertain, and that sort of helps maintain interest. We've also had pretty good success with contests and increasing our follower count and sort of our engagement with our followers during contests. We have an annual mini grant contest, which last year increased our follower count significantly. But of course, financial and practical issues make it so that you can't have contests every day, or else, it's not exciting for people anymore. The challenges that we've kind of bumped up against are public interest, because of course not everyone is interested in what we're posting, but rather than focus on that, we try to just connect more with the people who either are showing interest or potentially likely could. Connecting also kind of takes a different form online than it does in person, obviously, and so learning social media etiquette for each platform is pretty important. For example, on Twitter, it's kind of customary if someone reblogs or retweets a post of yours, and it's super important, then you say, oh, thank you, in a direct message to them. And then, of course, forms of connection are also built into the sites themselves. Like on Facebook, you can like posts. On Twitter, you can favorite or retweet. But probably the most difficult part of running social media is competing with other people who are also trying to get their posts seen, which I guess sort of revisits the importance of consistency in posting and having unique and interesting content as well. Like I said, social media platforms and the informational nature of what we do at the Clark Historical Library can kind of seem a bit contradictory, but I think that they can work together. Thank you all for your time, and if you have a Twitter account, feel free at any time today to respond to today's presentations using the hashtag MidMishDPM, that's MIDMICHDPM. And once again, like Ali said, please follow us at DidMish News or find our Facebook. Thank you.
Okay. I probably have too many slides, so I'm going to try and move pretty quickly. The first thing I wanted to say is, for us, I think modeling digital object relationships with RDF with Fedora Commons is probably the most important thing that we do in building our infrastructure. And this is after, of course, installing the software, getting the materials. This is conceptually the most important activity we undertake. So I just wanted to kind of do a quick overview of it. So RDF stands for a Resource Description Framework, and it's like an international set of conventions for resources to link to each other. It's often used online. This is kind of the basis of the semantic web. In Fedora Commons, they call it object-to-object metadata encoded in XML. And so it's very similar to the RDF, but RDF is sort of a larger convention, and in Fedora, you're using like a little subset of it to link objects together. And in Fedora, they call them triples. These are encoded in XML, but a triple is a subject, a predicate, and an object. So you can see here in a typical triple, you have the subject, the predicate, and the object. An example was like Hamlet was written by Shakespeare. And it's something to note, which I'm not actually looking at my notes here, is that as you were thinking about these, the subject is often flipped from normal grammar, where the subject is sort of what's being talked about. And I'm hoping Cole will correct me if I'm wrong. It's a grammar expert here. But it's confusing. Also, we're talking about objects in Fedora Commons and the word object in a subject-predicate sentence. So you kind of have to hold these thoughts simultaneously. I'll try and say digital object as we kind of keep moving. So an example in Fedora is actually, in the middle here, it's a book object that we have. So this is sort of something you could click on. And we're saying that it is a member of a collection, and it happens to be the Ramsey collection. And so that's a very simple triple saying this book is part of this collection. And you can actually see, this is kind of getting into what it looks like on the back end. These are the identifiers for those actual objects. So the process, this is what the process ends up look like. And when I say that content modeling was the most important thing we did, it was also the most challenging and where we got hung up in the beginning. We thought, okay, let's sit down and we'll write a content model for images, audio, video, text. Nailed it, great. None of them worked. We kept finding out that we had to have other kinds of derivative copies and stuff. So we found that we were going to build them ad hoc, and that's been a pretty good approach for us. So we have lots of items in there, but we still don't have a video content model. This is kind of zooming out a little bit, and so you can see that this is an example. There's one triple there, and there's another And so for a complex object, it's going to have lots of sort of tethers to other objects in the repository, and this is how it builds out the network of relationships. These things down here are actually other objects that themselves are saying, I'm part of that book object. The book object is part of this collection. And this is how Fedora allows you to say, this object can be part of multiple collections. The whole idea of hierarchy is kind of gone, so it's kind of a brave new world of building these relationships. This is zooming out even more, and you can see that you start to get them, quite a few of them. We have about 7,000 objects in Fedora, and checking on Friday, yesterday, there was over 1 million of these triples written. Clearly, we didn't write 1 million of these triples. A lot of them are automatically generated, but in thinking about modeling content, you have to think about, I'm going to put in a book, I'm going to have to write 7 triples. I'm going to put in 100 books, I'm going to have to write 700 of them. So you have to think about scripting. How are you going to script the creation of these? This is all the triples related to only one object. The ones in green are what's showing up in here. And so you can see there's a lot of them just generated on the back end. So why is this important? I think we kind of boiled it down to 2 things. When you, say you have a flagship collection and you take a lot of time modeling it, and then you have a little crappy collection that no one cares about, but it's just been sort of straggling and coming along. I shouldn't say crappy, I'm sure it's very, people love it. But when they're both modeled with the same kind of content modeling, and you have to migrate or move systems or take further preservation actions, the fact that the smaller collection is modeled in the same way as this flagship collection means they're both going to move along together. So it's sort of this hitching of wagons that we're hoping for. Second, it's also paramount importance to get a front end that works with your back end, is you have to have something that's logical and consistent. I think in a perfect world, you could model content and somebody else could walk in and build a front end for you. I'm probably running out of time. These were sort of future things that we've been thinking about for RDF relationships, but it's something that it's, at the very general, you're working with these triples. At the most complex, you get into these ideas of how are we going to create relationships in our repositories, and it's really the most central thing that I think we've done in the last couple of years working on it. That's it. Thank you.
Maybe we could have Graham come back up and talk a little bit more about RDF. That's some pretty cool stuff. Well, good morning. I'm Mike Shallcross. I'm from the Bentley Historical Library, and I'm going to talk a little bit today about a grant project we have, which involves trying to integrate ArchiveSpace, Archivematica, and DSpace into a kind of digital archives workflow. Before I get into that, I just want to note the Bentley Historical Library, we're down at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. We recently underwent a reorganization this summer, so now we have 2 divisions, collections and curation, but we are maintaining our age-old mission of documenting the activities of individuals and organizations around the state, and also serving as the official archives of the University of Michigan. So to get to this grant, in April we received a $355,000 grant from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, and it allows us to partner with the University of Michigan Main Library, from which we are administratively separate. And we have 2 main goals with this project. One is to facilitate the creation and reuse of descriptive and administrative metadata. With our current processing workflows, we tend to enter information into our finding aid templates. We then associate metadata with our kind of digital objects as we process them. And we also, in some cases, have to enter the same information into our repository interface as we upload things. And so this takes a lot of time. So we thought it'd be great if we could just kind of enter information once and have it shared in different locations. And then overall, we just want to streamline the ingest and deposit of fully processed materials into a preservation repository. And in this context, ingest refers to the receipt and validation of digital content, as well as performing certain actions that will prepare the content for long-term preservation and access. So things like maybe creating preservation copies of at-risk formats, or conducting a scan for personally identifiable information, such as social security numbers or credit card numbers. So we've outlined some key steps of what we want to accomplish with this kind of brave new workflow for us. We want to, and kind of are looking to leverage the affordances of these different platforms. ResourceSpace, which probably many people are familiar with, we want or have heard about. We're looking to create our accession records in there and then either spawn off resource records, kind of the basis for an EAD finding aid, or add, kind of associate those with existing resource records. We're then looking to use Archivematica to ingest materials, and then as of its most recent release, there's now functionality that allows you to take a single transfer or deposit and break it up into smaller ones, smaller submission information packages. And essentially these would be individual digital objects that we are looking to deposit in our repository. And this is where, we're still kind of getting more idea over reality, but we're going to be creating our archival description in ResourceSpace, and then use the ResourceSpace API to associate that information with the submission information packages in Archivematica. Then we're looking to have some additional functionality in Archivematica to prepare a simple archive format package or some similar thing that allows us to associate the basic descriptive metadata that our DSpace repository requires with the files, and that can essentially be allowed to automate the batch upload of multiple items at once. And then we're looking to export a list of handles from DSpace that we can then associate with digital objects in ResourceSpace. And for instance, Archivematica has already done some stuff that allows you to associate dissemination information packages with Archivist Toolkit. So we're maybe going to try to tread over some ground that's already been trod upon. So our progress thus far, it turns out that a good developer is hard to find. Or at least, maybe with the economy doing better here, it's hard to attract a developer to work on a 2-year term project at a university salary. So we had a position up for several months and really didn't find many qualified applicants. So we are now looking at trying to contract with Artifactual Systems who have developed Archivematica and kind of are the hosts of that, to have them do some of this development work for us. But we have had ongoing discussions with their information architect and president and product manager over the past months, as well as we've had conversations with Brad Westbrook and Chris Fitzpatrick with Lyrasis, who are the hosts of ResourceSpace. So we're looking to make sure that we are kind of coordinating with larger communities and that anything we develop will be applicable to actual user demand and the requirements of the community. At home, we've been doing a lot of testing with ResourceSpace with our legacy EAD and accession records, seeing how that stuff imports in, finding interesting errors with our own things and bugs in ResourceSpace. Actually, other people are finding the bugs. We're just finding them again. And we're also, thinking about, well, what conventions are we in need for entering new, kind of a new collection information into ResourceSpace? As part of our reorganization, we've been consolidating our physical and digital processing workflows. So this will directly kind of apply to what kind of comes out the end with how we're using Archivematica. And we're also looking to formalize our digital preservation policy, which heretofore has existed in maybe 5 or 6 different documents. So we're trying to kind of nail that down so we do have some basis for some of the decisions that we make as we kind of develop these finished workflows and are thinking about how we're going to employ these platforms. And then I couldn't resist a shameless plug for, we also have a new full-time permanent position that will be associated with this project. So there's a link there if anyone's interested or knows someone who's interested. So yeah, that's all the news from Lake Wobegon. Thank you.
So we're way ahead of schedule. Does anyone have questions for any of the speakers? I know the students had to leave, but or Michael or Robbie or who else was here still? Okay.
Yeah, I think this gets at maybe kind of some MPLP kind of things where, you know, there are certain collections based upon, you know, the inherent value of the content, or maybe just, you know, certain collections, you know, or series will require, you know, series level description. And so, you know, if we have meeting minutes from the Department of Psychology, you know, from 2000 to 2010, that's going to be a series level description, a series level kind of digital object that we're creating and packaging. So I think it really kind of depends, and this gets into, I mean, we're trying to, you know, in some ways map our strategies for dealing with physical archives to what we're doing with digital archives, and trying to employ some consistency in terms of trying to find the most efficient and kind of cost-effective ways of doing this. So yeah, in some cases I think we are just going to be describing at the series. In other cases we might have to get it more item level, but you know, kind of each collection is different. And I guess we are looking at using this for, at least primarily with digital archives. So probably not, we wouldn't, I don't know about, like, you know, digitization projects where we're doing books or pamphlets or something along this line. I don't know how that would fit into this workflow, but it might be applicable.
Any other questions? Aaron?
Yeah, so for Michael, again, I don't mean to grill you, but so all three of those tools seem to have, so thinking about after the ingest process, when you're now managing the collections, all three of those tools seem to have sort of monitoring functionality and management functionality. Do you see one of them, you know, doing the bulk of that work, or using all three, using the strengths of all three? Have you thought, you know, through the sort of management after ingest?
Question, and we have not gotten that far, you know, kind of to figure that out. We're currently using kind of a homegrown FileMaker database that kind of functions to help us keep track of, okay, this information is here. And then our finding aids have also, you know, kind of provided those links of, you know, kind of contextualizing our digital objects with our overall collections and providing direct links to things. So I'm not really sure. I know the artifactual people are interested in pushing kind of their archival storage kind of functionality as being, you know, this is the way to do it. And I'm sure they're going to continue pushing that. I don't know if that's going to work for us in our context. But I imagine that just with kind of having a lot of, you know, different media and genres of content, that we have been using our finding aids as being like kind of central location. But I'm not really sure, so that'll be one of the interesting things we find out.
Any other questions?
This is for Rob, for Reel to Reel. Are you planning on doing any transcriptions with your files?
We've kind of played with the idea of doing some automated transcriptions. It kind of depends. So there's it's with ProQuest, right? We kind of played with that idea. They're, you know, they kind of offer automatic transcription software. It kind of uses the same thing you do like on a TV show. They, you know, the closed captioning, and they kind of like transcribes it as the show is playing. And there's an interesting level of error with that, and so it's kind of a debate whether, you know, kind of a, not really signal noise, but, you know, how much effort do you want to put into this and for certain content. And so we played with the idea. We haven't really, you know, looked into it too much. A lot of what I do is actually like, you know, simple descriptive of the content of tape. You know, this is a tape, the speakers are here, the speakers, it's on this subject, and that sort of thing. So right now it's mostly kind of item level, no transcription specifically yet. So.
Anyone else? Oh.
I was curious about who the followers were for social media, because I know at Grand Valley they've been trying to analyze who the followers are for our different social media accounts, and what proportion is other institutions, and what proportion is sort of the public, and what proportion is students or faculty or staff at the institution. I don't know if anyone can answer that.
Truthfully, I can't accurately answer the question. I know it's a variety of people. I know the students are doing a lot of what is going on in the social media. It could be something from their hometown newspaper they find, or something bizarre they find. I know there's a number of people in different historical societies following, people who are interested in newspapers, people interested in different types of research, so it's not all CMU people. I know that Kim was telling us in a recent presentation she did, there are people from foreign countries. There's some people from India following, which I was stunned. I couldn't believe that, and they're not CMU alums. So I don't know what triggered that, but there's people from India following our social media, and it's only for the newspapers, the newspaper project. But there are people from several foreign countries. I know that. And a lot of it is just the topic, I think, is what's really getting them. I may be totally wrong, but I do remember part of that from Kim's presentation.
I think our experience from Michigan State is similar. We have quite a range, not just alumni and students following it. But I don't know the numbers. I could check with our social media person.
I had a question for Graham. What kind of objects are you, creating triples for and describing in your repository?
Mostly image objects. So we've got single images where there's one object. We've got complex images where there's an object and then different associated ones. And these ebooks where they have a lot of constituent objects. That's about it so far. We've sort of been laying the groundwork. We haven't done any audio, no video, no documents. I think it might. I left out one. We do have volumes and issues, so we've been playing with this idea of how do you have hierarchy in sort of a hierarchical system. Yeah, I think you could, and that was sort of our approach, is as it comes to figure out how to model it in a way that we could present it on the front end and also kind of preserve it and manage it. So hopefully.
Hey, Graham, can I ask you a question? So we also have a Fedora Commons installation, and we use, it's sort of the baseline functionality of the more infrastructural backend component of the RDF. So just the collections. We've been thinking a lot about the bibliographic metadata and how that could potentially be either added to those RDF statements. Have you experimented with that, or do you have any sense of how you might leverage what traditionally is kind of stored in an index or something like that, and storing it instead into the triple store?
So Fedora's got that built-in ontology of is member of collection. So there's a whole bunch of these relationships. Scott Prater from Wisconsin helped us add our own ontology that's got some additional relationships. We have one that's is discoverable or has security policy. But we've thought about trying to derive bibliographic, or ones from mods records into RDF statements. Dublin Core has automatically done that by Fedora. And a lot of those statements that were up there were Dublin Core. But in terms of, I don't see any reason why you couldn't. Question of making that ontology.
Marian?
I have a question for Rob about the Reel-to-Reel Tapes project. Recently, I got a bunch of different recording media, including various reel-to-reels, and we got them because of African-American spirituals, which were supposedly recorded on it. However, I can tell from some of the labels, and some of them, of course, as we know, unidentified, right? Typical. But there may be millions of things on these. And some of them are obviously copyrighted TV shows, PBS specials, and then who knows what else they did. There's Beatle music on some of them, okay. So I'm trying to think, okay, is it worth it to try and go in and somehow reformat or copy some of that material that might be relevant? And I was wondering, you said, okay, you read a label, it says one thing, then there's 3 or 4 other things on it, very typical. Are you reformatting and doing metadata for all of the stuff on there, or are you just picking certain things to do? Do you know what I'm asking?
Oh, yeah, I do. This has actually been a really fun part of my job, because when I do find something like that, if I was starting with speech 1975 and I find all these different things on there, I've always tried to, that's one of the most important things I try to get a descriptive description of. For example, you know, at 20 minutes it changes to recording of popular music, and I will suffice to say that I really love to dig through old records, and so half the time I can identify them. I'm kind of nerdy and proud of that, but that's usually, try to get as much descriptive information as you can anytime the content is not what is expected. And usually we've kind of had in our database, we have a kind of informal tag that basically just says unexpected content. And the idea is that we can just kind of look through that and be like, oh, you know, we expected a speech, but then we've tagged this with, you know, unexpected content. You know, at 20 minutes, there's a different speech. At 30 minutes, a male speaker starts, you know, or we have a second part of the tape, and let's say, you know, completely different content, recording of a television show. And so for some things, you know, obviously, you know, determining the copyright for this and then of another, you know, 1,600 different tapes is, you know, impossible essentially. So it's really, you know, kind of the importance of just keeping a description of what you can describe with the time you have, kind of following an MPLP argument. You know, don't want to spend the entire day identifying every track on every single, you know, every single tape, but at the same time kind of, at least when the researcher, there's nothing worse than when a researcher gets a tape out and then they find that, you know, they were expecting, you know, musical recordings and they find something completely different. So if you can at least get that information out there, and then you can let the, you know, researcher kind of, you know, determine what's going on here. It's the best you can. So does that answer your, yeah? Okay. So right now, because of the kind of bulk of the project, we've been kind of saying that everything's going to get digitized. The descriptive information will be there, but we're just kind of assume that it's all equivalent content, even if it is completely different. So it's all getting reformatted. It's all getting, the vendor basically, we send it out to the vendor, and usually it's the vendor through their digitization that we come up with these surprises, because we asked our vendor to make a new audio file every time the speed changes, for example. Because if they didn't make a new audio file, you would have you know, normal speed of speaking, and then if they didn't make a new audio file and then change the speed, you'd have chipmunks. So we have to kind of create a different, anytime something changes on the tape, we have to create a new audio file. So, and because of that, we've just kind of decided that all content is equal, and it will be, you know, just described the best we can within the time we can, but everything will be reformatted, yes. Yes, it's the Media Preserve, or the Media Preserve. It's either, I think it's the Media Preserve, and they're outside of Pittsburgh, I believe. Mm.
Do we have any more questions, or we can break early, I guess? We'll be over in the room where we started for our next session. Was it the Baber? Baber, I keep saying, want to say Babar. All right, so we'll break now.